In the 16th century, Europe was at war, and it was a war being waged with deadly new weapons. Suddenly, surgeons were dealing with blood loss on an unimaginable scale.
Loaded and half-cocked.
I've come to meet historical weapons expert Kevin Hicks. He's going to demonstrate for me the weapon responsible for all the bloodshed. The musket.
The sheer blast, the heat that comes from the guns, and when you add the heavy guns with it too. They do reckon that when the heavy guns opened fire, there was a mist above the soldiers. That was actually blood.
I want to see the sort of damage a musket can do. Instead of a man, I'm going to shoot 20 pounds of dead pig. Right, great, moment of truth. I've never done this before. This one here. Right.
Right, fire at will.
Okay. Woo! Can I have another go? It would be bleeding like a proverbial pig, wouldn't it, if it was
Well, if
fresh?
this was a stomach, imagine the trauma.
Yes.
The entire intestines, there's a hole through them, they're leaking anyway. But imagine the punch. You know what it's like when somebody punches you in the stomach?
Yeah.
Well, that's an express train hitting you in the stomach.
Let's see what's happened on the other side. Right, some holes here. Bleeding heavily, the soldiers would have been dragged off the battlefield to have the bullet extracted.
First thing they had to do was put their finger in to find out where it was, but we
Right,
can feel that
feel
one,
it,
can't you?
yeah.
Yeah, I'll brace it for you. Look at that.
Fantastic. And you got one going right through there. Yep.
That's actually blown the vertebrae straight out.
Right, that kidney didn't enjoy it, did it? And with these terrible wounds came terrible blood loss. For centuries, surgeons had used hot irons to cauterize wounds. But with gunshots, it was felt that something more sophisticated was needed. So they came up with this: boiling oil. It is almost unimaginable. Think about it, you've just been shot in the leg, the thigh, in the upper arm, and then a battle surgeon comes along and they pour boiling oil into your wound. No wonder so many of them died. Change, when it came, did via a Parisian barbershop. In the 16th century, you'd use the same tools to cut off a beard or cut off a limb, and you'd often go to the same person for both. To a barber surgeon like Surgery Pare. Pare spent his days shaving customers, lopping off the odd wart and doing the occasional bloodletting. Then in 1537 his life changed forever. He was sent as a battlefield surgeon to the siege of Turin. Even the journey into the battlefield was traumatic. Pare was forced to ride over the bodies of dying men, hearing their cries under his horse's hooves. He encountered gun wounds on a horrific scale, and day after day, week after week, he amputated limbs. Amputation was enormously risky. It meant pain and even more blood loss. Pare's patients frequently bled to death before he could boil up the cauterizing oil. To be honest, it doesn't sound like Pare was a natural surgeon. He was horrified by everything he saw. But his lack of enthusiasm for pain and bloodshed may well have been what drove him to find another way. For a long time, even Pare had to stick to conventional techniques. This is a saw used to cut off people's legs. And then, to stop the bleeding, he used this, a cauterizing iron. He was desperately looking for something better.
The important thing about Pare is Pare thinks for himself. He never assumes he already knows how to do something. He's always prepared to consider the possibility that there might be a better way of doing it. And that's a whole new way of thinking.
Pare was a compassionate man, and he worked on a range of wonderful inventions. Many were attempts to compensate for the limbs he had had to cut off.
My favourite is this. It's a sort of mechanical arm with flexible fingers.
But in the end, the solution to the real problem, blood loss, was something incredibly simple. A piece of thread.
This is called a crow's beak. It's actually one of his inventions. What he did is he would clamp off an artery with this end. Then he would get a fine silk thread and tie off the artery. And that is his great discovery. That is his unique contribution to surgery, the ligature.
The ligature had been used by the Arabs 500 years before, but it wasn't used in Europe until Pare put his new invention into action on the battlefield.
I want to show you just what Pare had to contend with, and we're going to do it in here. It's pretty gruesome. Hi there, Ben. Not yet, not yet. We've got an actor here, and I think a very, very realistic injury there. He wouldn't have bothered having a gown on, but I'm expecting quite a bit of splatter. Right, you ready to perform? This is the modern-day equivalent of Pare's crow's beak, and this is a ligature. He would probably have used silk. Right, OK, so we've just chopped the leg off and we're ready to go. Go. Right. Oh, nice. Right. So I'm trying to locate the artery, which is somewhere down here.
If Ben's injury were real, a litre of blood would be pumping out of his leg every 60 seconds. At that rate, he'd be dead in less than 5 minutes.
That's it. Hold him down. You're doing very well. Right. Right over left and under. Left over right and under. Well done. What would happen now is he would leave it long, and in a while this would just sort of die off and the thread would come off with it, and you might or might not survive, Ben.
Cool.
Thank you.
I've done a few times here.
Are you still bleeding?
So Pare had invented the ligature. You'd imagine it would have taken off immediately, but in fact 100 years later surgeons were still using boiling oil and cauterizing wounds.
It was not the first time that surgeons were slow to adopt something so obviously beneficial to their patients. Nor would it be the last.